sign it." Carl pushed the pen in front of me, his tone so calm as if he was dealing with a contract, not a 7-year relationship. I sat on the red leather sofa in the Civil Affairs Bureau, clutching a divorce agreement in my hand. The edges of the paper were a little curled, just like my past marriage, which was exquisite and decent, but had been worn down by time. He sat upright, wearing a black shirt with his cuffs buttoned meticulously. I looked at his slender fingers, and had imagined countless times that they would lead me to the wedding hall. Now, it was me who pulled it out from between my fingers. I signed my name without saying anything. Carl stood up and handed the documents to the clerk, his movements as smooth as if he were handing over an ordinary briefcase. "Here's the marriage certificate," he said. "Also, her ID card." The staff member nodded and began to work on the computer. 5 minutes later, a green divorce certificate, stamped with a red seal, was handed to me. I smiled and said, "Thank you." Carl glanced down at me, as if about to say something, but in the end, he just straightened his windbreaker. "You don't have anything to say?" I asked. He glanced at me, his eyes devoid of any lingering affection. "What do you want to hear?" I smiled, a pale smile. "Like an apology," I said. He paused for a moment, then said in a cold tone, "You're not clean either, Emily." My fingertips trembled, but I just nodded, "You're right. Let's just assume that neither of us is clean." He didn't say anything else, turned and left, leaving me with a resolute back. Outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, the sun shone brightly, illuminating his handsome figure. I watched his back as he gradually disappeared from my sight. My hands drooped limply, and I lowered my head, gently stroking my belly. There, a life, less than 3 months old, was beating. "Baby, I'm sorry," I murmured. "Mom didn't get to see him love you." After leaving the Civil Affairs Bureau, I sat in the car, lost in thought. Messages popped up on my phone, one after another. "Emily, are you crazy? You're pregnant with his child and you're divorcing him?" It was from my best friend Jane. My fingertips paused on the screen, but I didn't reply. Another message popped up, "Are you really not going to tell him?" I stared at the words for a long moment, then replied with 4 words, "No thanks." What would it matter if I told him? Did he love me? From the beginning to the end, this marriage was forced by his parents. He could not come to the wedding day, could fly abroad on business when I was sick with a fever, and could say coldly, "Are you trying to gain sympathy?" when I was pregnant. He never once asked me, "Emily, are you okay?" That night, I returned to my rental apartment and vomited all night. The baby in my belly made me feel uneasy and heartbroken. I squatted, hugging the sink, tears dripping onto the white porcelain, melting into the water without a sound. The phone rang again. It was Carl. I froze, hesitated for 2 seconds, and answered. There was a moment of silence on the other end before his voice rang out, "I left your ID card. Do you want to pick it up now, or should I mail it to you?" I closed my eyes. "I'll pick it up tomorrow." "Okay." As he was about to hang up, I suddenly said, "Carl." You, don't come to see me again. We're done." He said, "Okay." The sound of the phone being hung up was even more decisive than if he had said divorce himself. I stared out the window at the sky, having not slept all night. The next day, I went to his apartment to get his ID. He wasn't there, so his aunt opened the door for me. Standing in the place where I'd lived for 2 years, it suddenly felt so strange, like a dream. His usual folders were still on the coffee table, and the shirt I'd washed for him was already yellowed on the balcony. Auntie handed me an envelope. "Emily, everything is here. He has been a little busy these days, you." I took the envelope and didn't let her finish, "Thank you." She glanced at me and hesitated, "You really won't tell him?" I lowered my head, "No need. I will have the child, but it has nothing to do with him. Since he thinks I'm unclean, then he should have nothing to do with me anymore." On my way out, I ran into Carl at the elevator. He was wearing a custom-made suit, buttoned perfectly, not even the cuffs were crooked. He saw me and frowned, why didn't you wait for me? I lowered my eyes and said calmly, didn't you say you could send it to me? I want to get it as soon as possible. He didn't say anything, just looked at me. I suddenly smiled, Carl, I have received my things. From now on, we will not see each other again. Are you really leaving? He said in a cold voice. I raised my head and looked at him. You've been wanting me to leave for a long time, haven't you? Now it's your wish. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but in the end, nothing came out. I brushed past him without even looking back. Behind me, his silent gaze cut like a knife, slicing through my back inch by inch. That night, I walked alone by the river. The wind was so strong it stung my eyes. Suddenly, I felt relieved. This marriage was finally over. I no longer had to be humble and fawn over others, wait alone at the door late at night, or force a smile and say, it's okay. But just as I got in the car to go home, my phone rang again. The pregnancy test results were in, and you were really pregnant. I stared at the words, my vision blurring. My fingers trembled uncontrollably, my lips and teeth clenched. The most absurd thing in the world was, I'm pregnant, but the father won't know. 3 years ago, Carl and I had a flash marriage. I was 23 and had just joined Goose as an administrative assistant. He was 30 and the youngest executive director in the company. The first time I met him was in a conference room. He was dressed in a neat suit, looking down at documents, his eyes calm and his aura awe-inspiring. He was like the sea in winter, distant and cold, yet inviting. I was so foolish back then, I really thought I'd found love. But in reality, this relationship was wrong from the start. We got married because his mother forced us to. Viola was a well-known tough woman in the industry, with high expectations and a disdain for me, who came from an ordinary family. But she was in poor health, and when she was diagnosed with the disease, all she wanted most was to see Carl settle down and start a family. I was arranged to be with him only because his mother thought I looked quiet, obedient and well-behaved. More importantly, I liked him and I never denied that I loved him. Even on the day of our flash marriage, I foolishly thought that even if there was no love, we would gradually develop feelings. Unfortunately, the coldest thing in the world is unrequited love. In the first year of our marriage, he often didn't come home. I sent him a message, what time will you be home? He only replied, I'm working overtime, don't wait for me. One time, I had a fever of 39 degrees Celsius and called him at 1 a.m. He said, don't we have medicine at home? I cried on the other end of the phone, Carl, am I your wife? He was silent for 2 seconds and said, then stop acting like a child. From then on, I learned to keep my mouth shut. I thought if I didn't argue, he'd slowly accept me. I thought if I treated someone with my heart, he'd eventually respond with tenderness. Until that day, I ran into him and Tina in his office. Tina was his ex-girlfriend. I stood outside the office door and saw her leaning into his arms, whispering, Carl, I know you still have me in your heart. He didn't push her away, nor did he deny it. At that moment, I truly understood, some people, no matter how hard you try, will never get the slightest response. I turned and left without crying or making a scene. I went home and had a fever all night. The next day, I found out I was pregnant. Before I could tell him, he sent me the divorce papers. That morning, I saw a document on the coffee table in the living room. The first page clearly read, divorce agreement. He was wearing a black shirt as usual, sitting on the sofa drinking coffee, and his tone was as calm as if he was saying, Emily, the water is ready. I stood there, my fingers trembling, why? He didn't look up, don't think I don't know what happened between you and Neil. I was stunned, what are you talking about? I have seen all the records of your late-night text messages and early morning meetings. He said. It suddenly dawned on me. He really thought I was having an affair with Neil. Neil was a college classmate. He'd drunkenly called me that night after a breakup, and I'd taken him home and slept on the couch. Nothing had happened. But he only saw the result, not the explanation. I stepped forward, my voice hoarse, do you believe me? He looked up at me, his eyes cold with judgment. "You're not worthy of my trust." At that moment, I suddenly laughed. All my persistence, humility, and patience completely collapsed under his words, "You're not worthy." I didn't argue or cry anymore. I just turned and went into my room, gathering my things. I knew this marriage no longer needed me. The fact that he didn't even bother to ask, "How do you explain this?" was enough to prove it all. I moved out with the help of my friend Jane. As she carried my luggage, she scolded him harshly, "Carl is a scumbag. You're pregnant with his child, and he suspects you of infidelity. How blind." I sat on the edge of the bed in the rental apartment, my hand caressing my belly, and whispered, "Stop scolding. I don't want the baby to hear it." She was stunned for a moment, her eyes red. "Are you still protecting him?" I shook my head. "It's not protecting him, it's letting him go. I don't want to keep him in my life anymore." As the days passed, I began to learn to live on my own. I played prenatal music for my baby every night, woke up early to take folic acid, and attended my monthly prenatal checkups. My child was like a miracle, helping me through those darkest days. I remember one day, after returning from a prenatal checkup, it was snowing. I stood on the balcony of my rental apartment, holding a hot water bottle, looking out at the white sky. My phone suddenly lit up. The caller ID read, "Carl." I hesitated for a second, then answered. His usual cool voice came from the other end, "I sent your ID card." I whispered, "Thank you." He paused for a few seconds and said, "Are you okay?" I paused and replied, "Fine." He didn't say anything else. After hanging up the phone, I suddenly remembered a saying, "Some people, once missed, are gone forever." The first time Carl suspected he'd left her was 7 days after the divorce. He returned home as usual and, upon opening the door, was struck by a chilling emptiness. Her slippers were missing from the entryway. They had been there for 2 years, untouched by the soft, beige velvet slippers. He walked into the bedroom. The cat-shaped alarm clock on the bedside table was gone. She'd bought it at the night market, calling it cute and practical. He frowned and opened the closet. All her clothes were gone, even the furry pajamas he'd disliked so many times. She really left. Carl stood in the empty bedroom, suddenly feeling a little irritated. He took out his phone and opened WeChat. The chat history was still stuck on the day of the divorce. "Don't come to me again. We have nothing to do with each other anymore." He stared at the words for a long time, but his fingertips couldn't type a single word. He had assumed that this unrequited departure would only last a few days. Given Emily's personality, she wouldn't just leave without a word. She had always been soft-hearted and silly, her nose reddening when she cried, and always saying, "Let's stop arguing," when faced with a problem. She loved him. That was something he had always been certain of. But this time, she had truly left him completely, without even a hint of turning back. 2 weeks later, he received a call. It was from the hospital. "Hello, is this Carl? We can't reach Emily. Her pregnancy test results are out. Please tell her to come back for a follow-up checkup." Carl held the phone, his mind blank. "What? Pregnancy report. She's pregnant, 12 weeks along, and needs regular checkups." The voice on the other end was calm, as if discussing a routine medical procedure. But he only heard 2 words, "pregnancy." His throat tightened, and it took him a long time to find his voice. "Are you sure? Are we mistaken? We are the obstetrics and gynecology department of Renan Hospital. Miss Emily has a file in our hospital and undergoes monthly checkups. There is no mistake. She is indeed pregnant." Carl didn't sleep all night. He went through almost every contact in his phone book, even contacting her college roommate, the company's receptionist, and even colleagues in her former department. They all said, "She's quit. We can't get in touch with her." He went to the rental apartment where she had lived. The door had been changed, and a young couple now lived there. He called her parents, but they refused to answer and later blocked him. Overnight, it was as if this woman had vanished from the world, taking his child with her, leaving no trace behind. That day, he smoked facing the window for the first time. He didn't smoke, never. But that night, as he chain-smoked, his chest tightened, as if something were pulling at him, leaving a bloody mess. He suddenly remembered that she had once asked him, "Do you like children?" At that time, he was reading a document and replied without looking up, "Noisy." She just said oh and never mentioned it again. It turned out that at that time, she had already thought about having children. He went to the hospital. The entrance to the obstetrics and gynecology department was bustling with people, pregnant women entering and exiting one after another, some leaning on their husbands' arms, others walking slowly with their bellies bulging. He stood there, like a man abandoned by the world. The nurse asked him, "Who are you looking for?" "Emily," he said. The nurse flipped through the records. "She last came a month ago. She hasn't come for a follow-up checkup yet, and we can't contact her." He paused. "Is she the registered family contact?" "Yes." He was silent for a moment. "What if she doesn't show up again? What will happen to the child?" The nurse was stunned for a moment, speechless. He suddenly gave a wry smile, a drop of sweat dripping from the corner of his eye. He stood at the hospital entrance for a long time that night. He remembered that she always came back with an orange when she came for a prenatal checkup. "Why do you always buy oranges?" he once asked her. She said, "I don't know. The doctor said I should take vitamin C. And I think the baby would like it." At that time, he just frowned. Thinking about it now, her tone was light and her eyes sparkled when she said baby. But he was as cold as a stone. In the days that followed, he searched every private obstetric clinic. He used his family connections and even hired a private investigator. The only answer he got was, "No whereabouts." She had truly vanished. He began to dream about her frequently. In his dreams, she was wearing a white dress, standing by the river, holding a small baby, turning back to smile at him. "Carl, look, this is our son." He woke up with a start. It was still dark, his heart pounding like it was about to explode. He flipped open his phone, and the WeChat chat interface was still stuck on her message, "Don't come to me again." With trembling hands, he typed, "Emily, where are you?" The message went unanswered for a long time. He almost lost control and rushed to wherever she might be. Her favorite coffee shop, her favorite night market, the photo studio where she'd mentioned she'd wanted to take maternity photos. She was nowhere to be found. The girl who'd left without a word was finally gone. He suddenly felt like he might never find her again. It doesn't snow in the South City in winter, but the wind is cold. When I moved here from the North City, my belly was already noticeably pregnant. Standing at the door of my rented apartment, dragging my suitcase, I suddenly felt an indescribable sense of trance. It was as if I hadn't left home, but rather escaped a cage. Jane found me a house, a 3-story red brick building in the old South City. The neighborhood was quiet, and the landlady was kind. "Aren't you afraid of living alone?" she asked. I smiled and touched my belly. "I'm not alone. This little life in my belly is my warmest companion." The obstetrics department in the South isn't as good as in the North, but I still chose the most reputable private hospital. I always went there by car for every prenatal checkup. The doctor advised, "Don't go alone during the 2nd or 3rd trimester, the risks are too great." I nodded, "I'll be careful." But even though I was careful, I had no one to accompany me except myself. I didn't dare tell my parents. They were old and in poor health, and they couldn't accept me having a child alone and not planning to remarry. They sent me into marriage hoping for a stable life, but they didn't expect the siege would leave me scarred and battered. I don't blame them, but I don't want to worry them either. I have to hold on by myself. The days passed slowly, yet also quickly. Slowly, because I counted the days in anticipation of delivery, my belly growing heavier and my movements becoming increasingly inconvenient. Fast, because a child is like a young sapling, undergoing subtle changes every day. My first fetal movement happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was sitting in a rocking chair on the balcony, reading, when I felt a gentle tap on my stomach. I thought it was an illusion until I felt that gentle yet strong thump again. I couldn't help but smile. "Baby, is that you?" No one responded to me. But I knew he could hear me. I bought him his first pair of socks, blue, just like the color of the shirt Carl often wore. I don't know why I do this. I've already decided to cut off all ties with him, but at some unintentional moment, I can't help but think of him. Is it because I've loved him for too long that I don't even have the energy to hate him anymore? As my due date approached, I began preparing for the birth. My landlady hired a confinement nanny, Helen, a distant relative of hers. She was incredibly helpful and efficient. "Where's your man? Isn't he coming to keep you company?" she asked, cutting to the chase the first time we met. I smiled and said, "No man." She was startled for a moment, then stopped asking questions. She simply made my bed, changed my clothes, and made soup for me, meticulously caring for me. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares. In my dreams, Carl was standing outside the operating room, shouting anxiously, "Emily, don't get hurt." I cried in my dream, saying, "Don't come, it's too late." Then I woke up. When I woke up, all I could hear was Helen's snoring and the howling of the wind outside the window. On the day of delivery, I nearly fainted. Contractions lasted for over 10 hours, and I was practically exhausted. The doctor said the baby was in an eccentric position and needed an emergency cesarean section. As I was wheeled into the operating room, all I could hear was a ringing in my ears. Halfway through my consciousness, a nurse asked me who my emergency contact was. I opened my mouth, wanting to say Carl, but closed my eyes instead. "No one," I said, "only me." I didn't cry when the baby was born. When the doctor held him before me, I was stunned. It was a boy, his skin wrinkled, and he was crying heartbreakingly. I looked at his tiny fist, and suddenly my eyes welled up. "Baby, I'm sorry," I whispered. "Mom didn't give you a complete family." During those few days of recovery, I could barely move. Every movement of the incision felt like it was tearing my soul apart. Helen was caring for the child, her hands frantic but clumsy tenderness unfurling. "This little one looks just like you," she said. I looked down at him. But his eyes were like Carl's. That dark, calm, bottomless black. I gently pulled him into my arms and closed my eyes. Even if he didn't know anything, he never would. His father was someone who would never appear in our lives. During the confinement period, I didn't check my phone or contact anyone. Jane sent countless messages, but I didn't reply. I didn't want anyone to tell Carl I was still there. I knew he was looking for me. I could even guess he'd gone to the hospital, looked through my files, contacted my parents, and even found some trace of me in that small southern town. But I wouldn't let him find me. Not out of spite. But because I didn't want to go back. From now on, my child and I were a complete world. A world beyond him. The day my confinement period ended, I moved into another house with my child. I changed my address, my phone number, and deleted all my social media accounts. With my son, I began to live my life anew. I am no longer someone else's wife, no longer an accessory, no longer a shadow to be mocked. I am Emily, a mother, a woman, someone who deserves to be loved. Carl only found out she had given birth 6 months after she had been out of contact. During that time, he had searched through almost every hospital file in South City. It was a clue given by Jane. That day, she couldn't bear it any longer. The day she gave birth, the incision nearly split open. "Where were you?" She stood at the door of Goo's CEO's office, her voice hoarse as torn cloth. "You stood by and watched, pushing her into the abyss, and now you're pretending to be affectionate?" He sat in his office chair, motionless. Like a nail nailed to the sofa, even breathing hurt. Jane gritted her teeth and threw an address on his desk. "This is her last address before she moves. You can do whatever you want." She turned and walked away without even looking back. That afternoon, Carl drove to the South City. The sun was bright and the sky was like polished glass, without any impurities. But he was filled with dark clouds. He remembered Emily saying she loved the slow pace of a small southern town, the elderly man selling candied haws on the roadside, and the grandfather practicing Tai Chi in the sun. He said, "It's too noisy." She never mentioned moving again. He also said, "If you really like it, just move there yourself." She smiled and said, "You don't want to come?" He looked at her and said, "I don't have time to play house with you." But now, finally, he drove into the city where she'd once said she wanted to retire. He realized she wasn't just playing house. She was serious, planning to live alone for the rest of her life. He knocked on the door of the small red brick building. A woman in her late 50s, the landlady, opened the door. "Excuse me, is Emily still here?" The landlord frowned. "She moved out a few months ago, taking her little baby with her." Carl froze in his tracks. "A baby? How many months old?" The landlord thought for a moment. "She should be only a month old. A small, adorable little thing." His throat was dry. "Are you sure it's her child?" "Nonsense, if it's not hers, then it's mine." The landlord rolled his eyes at him. But it was really hard. The girl had no one to take care of her when she gave birth. She had a cesarean section and had several stitches. "My relatives helped take care of her during the confinement period." Sigh. Carl's ears felt like they'd been struck by lightning. His vision went black, his legs gave way, and he almost fell. She had truly given birth to a child alone. And that child was his. He didn't know how he'd left. Sitting in the car, the sky outside the window darkened as if it was about to collapse. He had never imagined that the woman who had waited for him every night would endure the pain of giving birth alone. He had never imagined that there was a kind of regret in this world that could silently crush a person's self-esteem and rationality. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Suddenly, he wanted to see her. Even if it was just a glimpse from afar. As long as she was still there, he still had a chance. He used his connections. Finally, he saw her at the door of a private early childhood education center. She was wearing a beige dress, holding a small, milky-smelling child, softly soothing him to sleep. The sunlight shone on the tips of her hair, creating a golden halo. The child curled up in her arms, sleeping soundly. At that moment, Carl wanted to cry. The scene he had imagined countless times became a reality today. But standing outside the picture was him. Not a husband, not a father, just an outsider. He mustered up the courage to step forward. "Emily." She looked up, and the moment she saw him, her expression wasn't surprise, panic, or even hatred. Just a faint calm. "Carl, is there something wrong?" That sense of alienation was more hurtful than any scolding. His Adam's apple moved, and his voice was hoarse. "The child is mine, right?" She glanced at him and didn't answer. Silence was confirmation. He took a quick step forward. "Emily, I didn't know. I really didn't know you were pregnant." She smiled, a little coldly. "You don't even care whether I eat or not. How do you know I'm pregnant?" He was stunned. Her eyes were tired, yet firm. "I can raise him alone. You don't have to get involved." "Emily, don't call me." She interrupted. "You calling me by my name now just makes me sick." He knelt before her for the first time. At the entrance of the early childhood education center, people were coming and going. He knelt down nonchalantly, his hands trembling. "Emily, I'm sorry. You can hit me or scold me, but don't chase me away. I want to make amends. I want to give him a complete home. I'm willing to start over." Her gaze faltered for a moment. But ultimately, she simply hugged the child tighter. She lowered her head, watching him speak word by word. "He already has a family. But, it's not you." For the first time, Carl realized that some mistakes, once made, are truly irreversible. It rained the day Carl returned to North City, distraught. It was the first rain of autumn, cold as ice needles. He sat by the French window in his office, his tailored suit soaking wet, exhausted but unwilling to change. The secretary stood at the door and cautiously reminded him, "Carl, the board has been waiting for half an hour." He didn't move. "They've all left. Tell them I don't want to talk." The secretary tactfully withdrew and gently closed the door. He looked down at the document on his desk. It read, "Carl voluntarily donated 45% of Goo's Group to Emily to compensate her for their marriage and child support." He signed it. She didn't. It's not that he didn't try. She never saw him, didn't answer his calls, didn't read his messages. He could only send her a WeChat message every day, like a diary. "It's raining today, is it cold over there? Has the little one learned to roll over? Emily, I dreamed of you. You said you were tired and didn't want to look back." She never replied once. His WeChat messages were like a message in a bottle sunk into the ocean, without even a bubble. Carl began to appear more frequently in her life. He gave her son milk powder, diapers, and toys, all the best brands. She refused to accept any of them. The early childhood education teacher advised her, "The child's father is sincere, too. Look at his dark circles under his eyes." She smiled faintly. He should have been dark-eyed a long time ago. One day, he stood outside her house all night. It was 3 a.m, freezing cold. She pushed open the door to take out the trash and saw him leaning against it like a dog drenched in rain, his eyes bloodshot and his lips pale. She hesitated for a moment, then finally took a dry towel and threw it over. "Take it and wipe it." He held the towel and whispered, "Emily, are you willing to see me?" She closed the door gently. "I'm afraid my son will be scared." At that moment, what hurt more than the rejection was that she said "my son." She never said "our son." Later, he actually transferred the shares to her name. He had a lawyer and notarized everything, except her signature. Jane took a look at the agreement and gasped, "Is he crazy? This is not a small amount of money." I took the document and flipped through a few pages, saying calmly, "He's keeping these things so he can regret it later." Jane looked at me. "Aren't you tempted?" My heart has been rotten for a long time. Now I'm using my brain. I'm tired, too. Raising a child alone isn't easy. I have to comfort my child when he cries at night. I have to carry him to the hospital when he has a fever. I have to squat on the floor to fix a broken pipe. I'm not Superman. But I'm no longer the fool who burst into tears when he said, "You're not worthy of my faith." On the day my child turned 1, I took him to the beach. The sea in South City was clear, shallow, and warm. I stood in the waves, holding him, the wind making him giggle. I bent down and kissed his little face. "Baby, thank you for coming to see me. From now on, we won't ask anyone for anything. We'll just rely on ourselves, okay?" He didn't understand, but he smiled, a milky aroma lingering on his lips. Carl still insisted on sending messages every day. The company had its annual meeting today. "You always said it was too noisy and you wanted to sneak out for barbecue. You know what? After you left, I didn't dare to look at any barbecue stalls anymore. Emily, when will you look at me again?" I didn't reply. Not out of hatred. Because, some love, if it misses its time limit, is no longer sweet. And now, I have to learn to hold an umbrella alone. I started working again. Using my old college account, I wrote articles, shot short videos, and documented my parenting. Within a few months, I had gained hundreds of thousands of followers. Advertising fees started rolling in, and my son and I were living better and better. I applied for a business license and launched my own maternity and baby brand. It's called Porcelain Moon. I didn't hate him. I simply sealed all my memories of him into those 2 words. And then, I never mentioned them again. 3 years later, Goo's Group and CUA brand officially signed a strategic cooperation agreement. Carl stood at the signing ceremony, looking at the cold-faced woman in a white suit sitting at the main seat, his throat tightening. She wore delicate makeup, her lips a delicate red, but her eyes were as sharp as a sharp knife. She looked at him as if she were a stranger. They had slept together for 3 years, over 700 nights of marriage, yet he had never truly understood her. But at this moment, her every word and action seemed to be torture to his dignity. At the pre-signing meeting, the vice president whispered to him, "Carl, the person in charge of PSUE will come to negotiate in person. Her name is Emily." His hand paused, and the pen slipped from his fingers. "What?" "Emily," the vice president said, pushing up his glasses. "I heard she's the founder and CEO. The brand has seen rapid growth in recent years and has already secured 2 rounds of funding." He stared blankly at the documents before him, speechless for a long moment. Then the conference room door opened, and that familiar yet unfamiliar figure walked in. Everyone around them stood up to greet her, and she nodded. "Thank you for waiting." He looked up, and the first sight of her made his heart skip a beat. She had truly changed. The tenderness in her bones remained, but the layer of humbleness he had once crushed had been completely stripped away. She was now the head of Emily Porcelain Moon. During the meeting, Emily explained the plan using professional terminology, her tone calm and logical. But Carl didn't listen to a word she said. His eyes kept fixed on her, like a prisoner who had been lost for many years and finally found his home. When the meeting ended, he mustered up the courage to chase her out. She paused and slowly turned back. "Carl, anything else?" The Carl he had called her 3 years ago seemed completely lost in the wind. His voice was hoarse. "How have you been lately?" She looked at him and smiled. "Fine. The company just entered Southeast Asia, and the orders are booked until next year." "Where's the child?" he asked. "Is he okay?" Her eyes darkened, but she replied lightly, "He's fine. You don't need to worry about him anymore." He said, "I want to see him." She said calmly, "But I don't want him to see a man who abandoned his mother." His eyes bled with pain. He felt like he'd been slapped in public. At that moment, his heart felt like it was nailed to time, even the slightest movement hurt. He watched her turn and walk away, her steps decisive and without a moment's hesitation. The woman who had hesitated, waited, and lowered herself for him was truly gone. On the day the cooperation agreement was officially signed, Carl stood before the signing board, his fingers trembling slightly. Emily picked up the pen and signed her name with ease. The moment the contract took effect, he suddenly understood something. She wasn't coming back to see him. She was coming back to discuss business. He wasn't even worthy of being called her ex-husband. Later, a photo leaked from the company. Emily was at a high-end cocktail party, sharing the stage with a rising star in the investment world. The man raised his glass to her, and she smiled back. That smile was dignified yet distant, the perfect textbook example of a businesswoman. Carl sat in the office, staring at the photo for a long time. The assistant knocked on the door and came in. "Carl, this quarter's financial report." He suddenly asked, is she happy now?" The assistant was stunned. "Who?" He didn't answer, just turned the photo over. He began to suffer from insomnia every night. 3 years ago, she stood at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau and whispered to him, "Don't come looking for me anymore." He thought it was just a fit of anger. Now he knows it was her last hurrah, letting go. And it took him 3 years to understand what she meant. "I want to live the rest of my life without you." When Carl found the lawyer, his voice was so low and hoarse that it almost didn't sound like his own. "I want to see him. My son." The lawyer was silent for a moment, then asked, "Do you want to apply for custody?" He nodded. The lawyer paused, then handed over a document. "Carl, here is the currently public information about Ms. Emily and her children. She has a stable income, her business is operating well, she lives in a safe environment, has no criminal record, has excellent educational resources, and her children are in good health. Legally speaking, she's the most suitable independent guardian." Carl's fingertips trembled slightly. "What about me?" The lawyer glanced at him and said nothing. Silence was the most ruthless answer. But he didn't give up. Even if there was only a slight chance, he wanted to fight for it. It wasn't revenge, nor was it for face. It was simply because it was his child. He had missed that woman before, and he didn't want to miss their son again. The day Emily received the lawyer's letter, she had just finished a live stream selling goods. She looked at the red-headed document, her lips curled slightly. Jane exploded, "Is he crazy? How dare he ask for custody?" Emily remained calm, "Of course he has the nerve. He thinks he can win everything back just because he has money and power." Jane slammed the table in anger, "You have to fight back." Emily said, "Of course. And I will make him admit with his own mouth that he doesn't deserve it." 2 days before the court hearing, the two met in a mediation room. It was an informal mediation arranged by the court, but the atmosphere was even colder than after the verdict. Carl wore a black suit, his eyes red, as if he hadn't slept all night. Emily, dressed in a sharp white suit, held her child, her expression calm. The child was hidden in her arms, only a pair of round eyes showing, curiously looking at the man before her. Carl's Adam's apple moved slightly. "I just want to be with him as he grows up. I'm not stealing him away. I just want him to know that I'm his father." Emily lowered her eyes, her voice so soft that no emotion could be heard. "Father? When did you start to realize this? Was it the day I signed the consent form for surgery in the hospital with my belly bulging? Or the day I comforted him in the middle of the night when he had a fever and vomited milk? Or the moment you coldly watched me sign the divorce agreement?" His breath hitched. "Emily, I know I was wrong." Her tone remained calm, but every word was like a knife. "Mistakes are not the problem is, some mistakes can't be repeated. You missed the first difficult year of his life. Now you want to show up and ask us to pave the way for you? You don't deserve it." Carl's eyes were red. "I just want to make some compensation." "Your compensation," she interrupted, "has long expired." The mediation failed and the formal litigation process began. But on the day of the trial, Carl took the initiative to withdraw his application. No one forced him to do so, and there was no legal action. It was just that morning that he saw a photo. The child was riding a small sled, chasing her in the sunshine, laughing crookedly, and fell down. She rushed over to pick him up, patting his back and coaxing him, with tenderness on her lips. He suddenly understood, that was home. And he was an outsider intruding into someone else's world. After withdrawing the lawsuit, he contacted her. "I won't fight anymore. You're right, I don't deserve it. But Emily, I'll be right here, watching over you. Whenever you're tired, I'll always be here." She didn't reply. He didn't bother her again. One morning, he was sitting in his car when he saw her, holding her child's hand, getting breakfast. She bought the child a small steamed bun, took a bite, and fed it to him. A little sauce stained the child's mouth, and she wiped it carefully with a tissue, her eyes full of patience and love. That was the gentle universe she held up all by herself. He didn't even have the qualifications to get close. He looked down at the WeChat chat box. "Baby, Daddy was wrong. When you grow up, if you are willing to recognize me, I will wait. You can hate me, you can disown me. But as long as you're doing well, Dad will be content." He clicked send. Soon, a message popped up. "The message has been sent, but the recipient has rejected it." It was late one night when Emily received the call. She had just put her child to bed and was preparing to pack documents for the next day's business trip when her phone suddenly lit up. The note was Jane. She picked up. "Hello?" Jane's voice, usually clear, was trembling this time. "Emily. Carl's in trouble." She was stunned for a moment, then asked, "What do you mean?" "He was in a car accident. Hit and run. The impact was in the chest. The doctor said he might not make it to the night." Emily was silent. The night wind suddenly rushed in through the window. She clutched her collar tightly, feeling something pressing down on her chest, a tight squeeze. Jane cautiously probed on the other end of the phone. "Do you want to come?" She was silent for a long time before saying, "I am not his family member and cannot sign the critical illness notice." You notify the Gu family." Then she hung up the phone. She didn't go to the hospital. She simply stood on the balcony, staring at the brightly lit South City, her eyes hollow. The curtain swayed gently, a stark reminiscence of the night 3 years ago when she stood on the Gu family balcony. That same night, she had a fever of 40 degrees Celsius and called him to beg him to come back. He said he was negotiating a contract and asked her to stop. And she, tossing and turning, hugged the cold blanket, fell asleep in tears. She didn't die that night. Now, he was struggling in the hospital ward. She didn't know if this was fair. The next morning, she sent her child to early childhood education as usual. The sun was warm, and the child was playing on the slide, sweating profusely. He kept mumbling, "Mommy, am I awesome?" She lowered her head and smiled, "Awesome. We're the best." At noon, Jane called again, "He's awake and keeps calling your name." Emily didn't answer. Jane was silent for a moment, then said, "You really don't want to come and see him?" "He may, really don't have time." She said softly, "I was almost dying once, and he didn't come." Carl woke up on the afternoon of the third day. The doctor said his injuries were severe and his chances of recovery were low. He was conscious, but his body was covered in tubes and he was too weak to even speak. "Is Emily here?" The nurse shook her head, "She's not here." He closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheeks. "So, where's the child?" the nurse said. "She came to the hospital alone with the child to get medicine, but she just stood at the door. You were unconscious, so she didn't come in." He turned with difficulty and looked out the window. Outside was the hospital parking lot, filled with strangers. She wasn't there. Nor were the children. The ward door suddenly opened. His heart skipped a beat, and he looked over to see it was her. She was wearing a white shirt, clean, calm, and standing straight. But her eyes were strangely unfamiliar. "You're here." He seemed to have grasped at the last straw, his voice hoarse, "Emily." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "I came here because your lawyer called and said there's something about the child that needs to be confirmed." "Go ahead." His face paled. "You did it for the child, not for me." She didn't answer. He trembled as he pulled an envelope from the bedside drawer and handed it to her. "This is something I left for him. I wrote a letter and some account documents. The password is your birthday. I'm afraid I won't live long enough for him to grow up." She tightened her fingers, but didn't take it. She simply said, "I'll pass these on." "Anything else?" He opened his mouth, his throat feeling like it had been scraped by sandpaper. "Can I meet him? In person?" She lowered her eyes and spoke after a long moment. "He doesn't know you. You weren't there when he was born, you weren't there when he had a fever, you weren't there when he cried out in pain from a toothache. You suddenly show up now and say you're his father. Do you think he'll understand?" His eyes were red and his voice was trembling. "I know I was wrong, Emily. I really know I was wrong." She smiled lightly, but there was no tear in the corner of her eyes. "Unfortunately, it's too late. I have the opportunity to forgive you, but I have no obligation to forget what you did. The moment you told me you are not worthy of my trust, I made up my mind. From now on, neither he nor I will need you anymore." When she left the ward, Carl burst into tears. It was the first time in his life that he had knelt down to beg someone, and it might also be the last time. But he understood, some people, once missed, are truly gone forever. 3 years later, the CUA brand's headquarters moved overseas. Emily stood in the airport VIP lounge, staring out the window at the runway in a daze. Her child sat on a small chair nearby, holding a picture book and mumbling to herself, "Mommy, what time does the flight leave?" 10 o'clock sharp, she replied gently. "Can I pet kittens there?" "Sure." "Then, will Dad be there?" She paused and turned to look at him. "Do you want to see him?" The child thought seriously and shook his head. "He doesn't know me. Besides, I don't know him either." Emily patted his head and said nothing. He was still young and didn't understand what leaving and regret meant. But she did. Only when she understood too much would she keep silent. Before boarding the plane, Jane sent a WeChat message. "Are you really not planning to come back?" Emily replied, "Yeah, there's more freedom abroad, and it's a little further away from the past." Jane sent a silent emoji. A moment later, another message came. "Carl, his health has been getting worse lately. He's now living in a sanatorium in the mountains, alone, and barely speaks." Emily paused for a moment, and finally replied, "I wish him well." Carl's last public appearance was at the Goo Group's 30th anniversary dinner. His hair was gray and his voice was hoarse. The quietest moment of the entire audience was when he said to the camera, "The person I feel most sorry for in this life has left me forever." No one knew who he was talking about, and no one dared to ask. Some speculated it was a former business rival, others a deceased relative. Only Jane knew those words were meant for Emily. And for himself, too. Emily lived a stable life abroad. As the child grew older, he became more intelligent and sensible. On his 6th birthday, he suddenly said, "Mommy, I'm going to protect you in the future, too. Just like Daddy." Emily was startled, then smiled. "Silly. Mom doesn't need to be protected. Mom, you are the one who can hold an umbrella by yourself." He nodded and said solemnly, "Then I will hold the umbrella with you, okay?" Emily squatted down and hugged him, her eyes slightly red. "Okay, let's do it together." That winter, Carl's condition worsened. The nursing home nurse said he often sat by the window, gazing at the sky, for entire days. When asked what he was thinking about, he always said, "Waiting for someone." He later left behind a handwritten diary, the first page of which read, "I once had her, but I didn't have time to love her. Later, when I wanted to love her, she no longer needed me." The last page was a letter he wrote to his child. "If you grow up and see this letter, don't feel sad for me. I once made the stupidest mistake in the world, which was thinking that love could wait. Love waits for no one. Your mother taught me this." Emily received this letter after he had passed away. She didn't cry. She simply put the letter in a drawer and gently locked it. It was a relic of the man she had once deeply loved. It was also the most complete farewell she had ever let go of in her life. The story finally comes to a close here. There's no dramatic reunion, no turning back to try and win her over. She takes her child and embarks on a new life, becoming the protagonist of her own destiny. He sank into a deep sea of regret and loneliness that could never be redeemed. Sometimes, the pain of love isn't the heartbreaking pain. It's when you look back and realize the person you most want to be close to has already walked away, with no way back.